Chapter 1. The Illusion of the Moment. Think about a moment in your life when everything seemed to hang in the balance of a single split-second decision. Picture a high-stakes argument with someone you love deeply. The tension in the room is suffocating. They have just said something that cuts you to the bone, hitting a vulnerability you thought was safe. You feel the heat rising in your chest. Your heart rate accelerates, drumming wildly against your ribs. Your breath grows shallow. In your mind, an insult forms, a perfectly crafted, devastating response that you know will hurt them just as much as they have hurt you. The words are right there, dancing on the very tip of your tongue, and then in a fraction of a heartbeat, you make a choice. You swallow the insult. You close your eyes, take a ragged breath, and softly ask why they said that. Or, conversely, you do not hold back. You unleash the words, watching the damage unfold the moment they leave your lips. When we replay these pivotal moments, we are obsessed with the exact second the choice was made. We place the entire weight of our morality, our character, and our identity into that tiny, fragile window of time. We tell ourselves that right there, in the fleeting space between an impulse and an action, exists our profound human autonomy. We believe that we stepped into the cockpit of our minds, grabbed the steering wheel of our biology, and deliberately turned the ship. We call this the present moment. We call it free will. But what if the present moment is an illusion? What if looking at the final few seconds before a decision is like walking into a movie theater during the final 3 minutes of a complex, sprawling epic, and believing you understand everything about why the characters are crying? To understand the architecture of human behavior, we have to dismantle the myth of the isolated moment. We have a deeply ingrained habit of drawing a sharp imaginary line around our decisions. We isolate the now from everything that came before it. When someone does something extraordinary, heroic, or terrible, we look desperately at the immediate moments leading up to the act. We want to know what they were thinking right then. We want to measure the electrical impulses flashing across the surface of their brain just milliseconds before their hand moved or their voice broke. Imagine scientists observing the brain of the person holding back that insult. They watch the monitors. They see the ancient alarm bell regions of the brain lighting up with fear and aggression. They see the sophisticated analytical frontal cortex engage, sending signals to apply the brakes, to shut down the impulse. They see the exact millisecond the electrical currents shift, resulting in the mouth remaining closed. It is incredibly tempting to point to the glowing screen and say, "There it is, right there. That is the spark of free will. That is the moment they chose." But this is a fundamental trap of human perception. It is a failure of scope. The electrical signals sweeping across the cortex in that final second did not manifest out of thin air. They were not summoned by a ghost in the machine. That final flurry of brain activity was entirely dictated by the biological and environmental conditions that existed 1 second prior. And the conditions of the brain 1 second prior were entirely determined by the conditions a minute before that. If you want to know why you held back your anger or why you lashed out, looking at the final 3 minutes is utterly insufficient. You have to ask a far more uncomfortable question. What put your brain in that specific state to begin with? Why was your frontal cortex, the part of you responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control, strong enough to win the battle in that moment? Was it because you are inherently a better person? Or was it because you slept for a full 8 hours the night before, meaning your brain had the metabolic energy required to fuel that complex braking system? If your blood sugar had been plummeting because you skipped lunch, would the exact same argument have ended in a shouting match? The uncomfortable truth of human biology is that the physical state of your body in the hours before a decision dramatically alters the landscape of what you believe is your conscious choice. But we cannot stop there. The timeline stretches backward relentlessly. The events of the past few hours are merely the most recent dominoes to fall. The way your brain processes conflict today is deeply colored by the weeks and months leading up to this moment. Have you been under chronic, prolonged stress at work? If so, the architecture of your brain has literally changed. The pathways responsible for sensing threats have grown thicker, more sensitive, and more reactive, while the pathways responsible for patience and long-term planning have physically withered. You do not just feel stressed. The actual hardware of your mind has been rewired by your environment. When you stood in that room, facing your loved one, you were not a blank slate making an independent choice. You were a biological organism shaped by the cumulative weight of everything that had happened to you up until that exact second. This brings us to one of the most profound and unsettling realities of existence. There is no such thing as an uncaused cause. Think of a river flowing down a mountain. When the water crashes against a boulder and splits to the left, we do not say the water chose to go left. We understand that the path of the water was determined by the slope of the mountain, the velocity of the current, the shape of the rock, and the gravitational pull of the earth. The water's movement is the unavoidable result of a continuous chain of prior conditions. Human behavior operates on the exact same principle, though our chain of conditions is infinitely more complex. Every thought you have, every impulse you feel, and every action you take is the final link in a chain that stretches back further than you can possibly perceive. There is no isolated moment of pure, untethered decision-making. You cannot pluck a choice out of the timeline and say, "This began with me." To believe in the traditional concept of free will is to believe that somewhere inside your brain there is a mechanism that operates completely free from the laws of biology, chemistry, and physics. It is to believe that a neuron can decide to fire without any prior stimulus, uninfluenced by your hormones, your genetics, your past traumas, or the breakfast you ate this morning. But nowhere in the observable universe do we find a system that operates outside of cause and effect. We cling to the illusion of the moment because it gives us a sense of ultimate authorship. We want to believe that we are the absolute captains of our fate, but recognizing the unbroken chain of prior causes does not diminish the beauty of human life. Rather, it deepens our understanding of it. When you realize that every choice is the culmination of countless seen and unseen forces, the world begins to look entirely different. Judgment begins to soften. Empathy becomes a logical necessity rather than a moral luxury. You begin to see that the person standing across from you is, just like you, the sum total of an incredibly complex history. The anger they directed at you was not born in a vacuum, just as your reaction to it was not created out of nothing. We are all participating in a grand, ongoing sequence of events, standing at the very edge of history, reacting to the momentum of everything that came before. The illusion of the present moment is a comforting shelter, but stepping outside of it is the first requirement for true understanding. We cannot begin to comprehend the architecture of our intentions, our failures, or our triumphs until we admit that the final 3 minutes of the movie will never tell us the whole story. We must follow the chain backward. We must look at how the foundation of our behavior was built long before we ever had the capacity to realize we were building it. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Intent. Think of a moment when you surprised yourself with an act of sudden instinctual goodness. Picture a crowded, rain-slicked city intersection. The light is about to change, the traffic is impatient, and a stranger ahead of you trips, spilling the contents of a heavy cardboard box onto the wet asphalt. Papers, tools, or groceries scatter everywhere. Horns begin to blare. The stranger drops to their knees, panicked, frantically trying to gather their life back together as the massive grills of idling cars edge closer. You are safe on the sidewalk. You have somewhere to be. You are running late. But before you even consciously formulate a sentence in your mind, your feet move. You step off the curb. You walk directly into the chaotic street, hold up a hand to pause the aggressive traffic, and kneel in the cold puddles to help the stranger gather their things. When you get back to your car, drying your hands, you might think, "I just decided to help." We use the word intent as if it is a spark struck from a flint in the dark, a sudden, original flame that belongs entirely to us. We believe that at the precise moment we saw the dropped box, we authored the desire to act. But this is the grandest illusion of human perception. Intent is never born in a vacuum. It is not a sudden spark. It is the final roaring note of a symphony that has been playing for a very long time. To truly understand where that moment of compassion came from, we have to look past the second you stepped off the curb. We have to excavate the architecture of your intent, layer by layer, traveling backward through time. Let us begin with the minutes and hours immediately preceding the event. Why did your brain interpret the stranger's panic as a call to action rather than a threat or an annoyance? The answer lies heavily in your immediate physiological state. Had you slept soundly the night before? If you were deeply rested, Your brain possessed the metabolic budget to engage your frontal cortex, the sophisticated region responsible for empathy, emotional regulation, and seeing the world from another person's perspective. If you had been severely sleep-deprived, operating on fumes, your ancient reptilian brain might have seized control, filtering the scene through a lens of survival and irritability. You might have simply stepped around the mess and hurried on. The amount of glucose in your bloodstream, the balance of hormones circulating through your veins from a comforting conversation you had over breakfast, the absence of acute physical pain in your own body, all these microscopic biological realities paved the way for compassion to exist as an option. But the hours before are merely the surface. Let us step back further into the months and years preceding that rainy afternoon. Your brain is not a static machine, it is a living, breathing landscape that constantly reshapes itself based on how it is used. This is neuroplasticity. If your life over the past few years has been filled with chronic trauma, relentless stress, or a cutthroat environment where trust is punished, the neural pathways associated with self-defense and suspicion will have grown thick and fast, like superhighways. The pathways for spontaneous altruism might resemble overgrown, neglected dirt roads. However, if you have spent the last few years practicing connection, experiencing safety, and reinforcing the habit of looking out for others, you have literally wired the physical structure of your brain for empathy. Your intent to help the stranger was physically carved into your brain over thousands of days before you ever saw them fall. We must go deeper still, rewinding the clock to one of the most turbulent and critical periods of your life, adolescence. The teenage years are a time of profound neurological construction. The frontal cortex, the seat of your most complex moral reasoning, is the very last part of the brain to fully mature, not finishing its development until you are in your mid-20s. This means that your capacity for empathy and impulse control was heavily shaped by the environment of your youth, precisely because your biology was not yet finished. The peer rejections you suffered, the mentors who believed in you, the cultural media you consumed, and the emotional safety of your teenage world all acted as the sculptors of your developing mind. The teenager you were laid the foundation for the adult who would eventually step into that street. And what about childhood? What about the months before you were even born? The field of epigenetics tells us that early experiences, and even the experiences of a mother during pregnancy, leave chemical markers on our DNA. These markers act like volume knobs, turning certain genetic tendencies up or down. If a fetal environment is flooded with stress hormones due to a mother's hardship, the developing brain may be calibrated for a world of danger, setting a higher baseline for anxiety and a lower threshold for trust. If the early environment was secure and nourishing, the baseline is set for openness. The intent you felt on that rainy sidewalk was heavily influenced by biological calibrations that occurred before you could speak a single word. Finally, we reach the bedrock. Your genetics and your ancient ancestry. Your DNA provided the initial blueprint for the neurotransmitters that flooded your brain when you saw the stranger in need. But those genes did not appear by accident. They are the evolutionary legacy of your ancestors. Imagine the generations of human beings that came before you, the ecological pressures they faced, the types of societies they had to build to survive in a specific climate, the cultural values of cooperation or fierce individualism they developed just to keep their children alive. You carry the echoes of their survival strategies in your genetic code and in the cultural norms that were handed down to you across centuries. When you put your hand in the cold water to pick up a stranger's belongings, you were not making a spontaneous, isolated choice. You were the tip of a spear hurled from the distant past. Your intent was the culmination of your evolutionary history, your genetic blueprint, your time in the womb, your childhood environment, the construction of your adolescent brain, the habits you built over the last few years, and the breakfast you ate that morning. It all flowed together into a single beautiful point of action. Understanding the vast, complex architecture of intent does not strip away our humanity, it multiplies it. It demands that we look at ourselves and at everyone around us with a profound, staggering grace. When you realize that the urge to do good, or the urge to do harm, is the heavy accumulation of countless biological and historical forces, you stop viewing life as a simple test of willpower. You start seeing human beings as breathtakingly complex landscapes, shaped by weather patterns they did not control. You begin to realize that our truest power lies not in believing we can magically summon intent out of thin air, but in understanding how it is built so that we might begin to build a kinder world for the generations whose minds are taking shape today. Chapter 3. The Myth of Grit and Character. There is a quiet, devastating moment that happens in the dark, usually long before the sun comes up. Imagine the shrill, sudden blare of an alarm clock shattering the silence at 5 in the morning. The night before, a promise was made, a vow to wake up early, to lace up the running shoes, to finally start the project, to be disciplined, to be relentlessly driven. But now, in the cold reality of the early morning, the warmth of the blankets is an undeniable gravitational force. A battle begins in the mind. It is a negotiation between the person you want to be and the profound, heavy exhaustion anchored in your bones. For a few agonizing minutes you stare at the ceiling, fighting a war of willpower. And then the hand reaches out, the snooze button is pressed, the promise is broken. When you finally wake up hours later, what is the very first thing you feel? It is rarely just disappointment. It is a deep, piercing moral judgment. You do not simply tell yourself that you were tired. You tell yourself that you lack character. You whisper the harshest words in the human vocabulary into your own mind. I am lazy. I am weak. I lack drive. I do not have enough grit. We live in a world that absolutely worships the concept of grit. We have built an entire cultural mythology around the idea of willpower. We love the story of the underdog who has nothing going for them, no resources, no advantages, but who simply grits their teeth, outworks everyone else, and forces the universe to yield to their pure, unadulterated tenacity. We are taught from a very young age that while we cannot control the cards we are dealt, we have absolute control over how hard we are willing to play the game. We believe that willpower is a magical, ethereal resource, floating in the ether of our souls, equally available to every single human being, completely independent of biology. But this belief is not just a misunderstanding, it is one of the most subtly cruel philosophies we have ever invented. To understand why, we have to look at how bizarrely inconsistent we are about human limitations. If you are standing next to a friend who is 5 feet tall, and you ask them to reach a book resting on a shelf 10 feet in the air, what happens when they cannot reach it? You do not cross your arms, look at them with disgust, and tell them they just did not want it badly enough. You do not accuse them of lacking the moral fortitude to grow taller. You instantly recognize that their physical height is a biological reality shaped by their genetics and childhood nutrition. You understand that they cannot simply wish their bones to be longer. If someone has terrible eyesight, we hand them glasses. We do not demand they squint harder and accuse them of a character flaw when the horizon remains blurry. We accept physical traits as the luck of the biological draw. Yet when it comes to the brain, the most complex, energy-demanding physical organ in the entire human body, we suddenly throw biology out the window. We look at traits like impulse control, emotional regulation, focus, and willpower, and we completely separate them from the physical machinery that creates them. We call them character. The ability to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing is not a mystical virtue. It is a highly demanding physiological function managed by a specific region of your brain right behind your forehead. This region is the braking system of human behavior. It is the part of you that whispers, "Do not eat that, do not say that," or "Get out of bed, even though it is cold." And just like the muscles in your legs or the retina in your eye, this braking system is a physical structure made of cells, requiring massive amounts of metabolic energy to function. When you ask your brain to exert willpower, you are asking it to burn fuel. If your blood sugar is low, if you are carrying the heavy, invisible burden of chronic stress, or if you have barely slept, the fuel tank for that specific part of your brain is virtually empty. Demanding that a stressed, exhausted brain simply generate more grit is exactly like demanding a car run on a completely empty tank of gas, simply because you really need to get to your destination. But the inequality of willpower goes much deeper than what you had for breakfast or how you slept last night. The actual physical capacity for grit is constructed over a lifetime. Imagine 2 children growing up. One is raised in an environment of safety, predictability, and emotional warmth. When they experience stress, a comforting adult helps them regulate their emotions, bringing their nervous system back to baseline. Over the years, their brain learns that stress is manageable. The biological pathways responsible for long-term planning and emotional control grow thick, robust, and highly efficient. The other child grows up in an environment of unpredictability, chronic anxiety, or scarcity. Their ancient survival brain is constantly firing, looking for threats. Because the brain is incredibly efficient, it prioritizes the connections needed for immediate survival and neglects the pathways needed for long-term planning. The physical structure responsible for willpower literally develops differently. It has less gray matter. It has fewer connections. When these two individuals reach adulthood and face the exact same daunting obstacle, whether it is studying for a difficult exam, resisting an addiction, or pushing through the pain of a marathon, they are not bringing the same equipment to the mountain. One is trying to climb in sturdy, custom-fitted boots. The other is trying to climb barefoot on jagged rocks. When the second person inevitably slips, we point our fingers and say they failed because they lacked character. This is the great myth of grit. Grit is not the absence of biological luck. Grit is the absolute pinnacle of biological luck. The ability to persevere, to delay gratification, and to maintain a fierce work ethic is the beautiful functioning result of a healthy, unstressed, well-developed brain operating in an environment that allows it to thrive. When we finally strip away the moralizing, when we stop pretending that willpower is a magical substance independent of our biology, something incredible happens. The judgment falls away and a profound, practical compassion takes its place. If we truly want to help people succeed, if we want to help ourselves succeed, we must stop demanding that people magically generate grit out of thin air. Instead, we must look at the environments, the stresses, and the invisible burdens that are draining their biological resources. The next time you find yourself hitting the snooze button, or struggling to break a bad habit, or feeling like you are falling behind, stop for a moment and silence the cruel voice of moral judgment. You are not a failure of character. You are a biological organism navigating a complex, exhausting world. Understanding the physical reality of willpower does not mean we stop trying to be better. It means we finally learn how to fight the battle with the right weapons. It means we stop attacking our own character and start tending to the roots of our own biology. Chapter 4. The Order. Hidden in Chaos. Imagine a crisp, windy morning. You are standing in a vast open field, holding a single autumn leaf in the palm of your hand. You lift your arm to shoulder height, open your fingers, and let the leaf go. You watch it dance. It spins, dips, catches a sudden updraft, violently whips to the left, and finally flutters down to rest against a specific blade of grass. Now, imagine you pick up that exact same leaf. You stand in the exact same spot. Plant your feet in the exact same footprints, hold your arm at the exact same angle, and drop it again. Will it land in the exact same place? Of course not. It will carve an entirely different, completely unpredictable path through the air and land feet away from its original destination. When we observe the leaf's second journey, we instinctively use words like chance, randomness, and chaos. The path of the leaf seems completely unscripted. And because the human mind is desperately searching for freedom in a universe governed by strict physical laws, we look at the wildly unpredictable nature of our own lives and draw a comforting conclusion. We tell ourselves that because no one can accurately predict what we will do next, our choices must be fundamentally free. But let us look much closer at that falling leaf. Was its path truly random, or was it simply shaped by forces far too complex for your eye to measure? The second time you dropped the leaf, the temperature of the soil had shifted by a fraction of a degree, altering the thermal heat radiating upward. A car driving down a highway 3 miles away had subtly displaced the air, sending a microscopic ripple through the wind currents. The blood pulsing through your own veins created an imperceptible tremor in your fingertips the millisecond you let go. Every single dip, dive, and spin the leaf made was strictly obedient to the uncompromising laws of gravity and aerodynamics. There was absolutely zero magic involved. It was entirely dictated by cause and effect. It was just spectacularly complicated. This is the profound difference between unpredictability and freedom. This is the order hidden inside what we call chaos. In our own lives, we experience this staggering complexity every single day, and we constantly mistake it for a break in the chain of cause and effect. Think about a day that completely altered the trajectory of your life, perhaps the day you met your closest friend or your partner. When you trace the narrative of that day backward, it almost always hangs by an impossibly fragile, terrifyingly thin thread. Perhaps you only went to that specific coffee shop because you spilled water on your shirt and had to go back inside your house to change, which made you miss your usual train by 30 seconds. Because you missed your train, you took a different route. Because of a slight detour due to road construction, you ended up walking down a street you rarely visit. You opened the door to the cafe at the exact second they were walking out, simply because someone ahead of them in line took a few extra moments to find their payment card. If any single one of those microscopic variables had shifted by a fraction of a degree, if the zipper on your jacket had stuck for 2 seconds, if the traffic light had stayed green a moment longer, your paths never would have crossed. Your entire life would look profoundly different. When we reflect on these moments, we feel a deep, overwhelming sense of awe at the sheer randomness of existence. And for centuries, defenders of free will have hidden inside this awe. They argue that because human behavior is like that falling leaf, because our choices are hypersensitive to the tiniest, most microscopic changes in our environment and our biology, we must possess a conscious will that operates outside the rigid chains of determinism. They confuse the inability to predict the future with the absence of cause. But consider the weather. If you ask a brilliant meteorologist to predict the exact shape of a cloud 3 months from today, or the precise millisecond a bolt of lightning will strike a specific oak tree next spring, they cannot do it. The atmosphere is a chaotic system. A slight change in humidity over a warming ocean thousands of miles away can amplify over weeks to completely alter the path of a storm. Yet, despite this absolute undeniable unpredictability, no rational person looks up at a thunderstorm and claims the clouds possess free will. We all inherently understand that the storm is just water vapor, pressure, and temperature acting under the strict, unbroken laws of physics. The weather is unpredictable not because it is free, but because the math is simply too massive for the human mind to calculate. Your mind is a weather system. It is a breathtakingly complex, chaotic environment of billions of neurons, constantly bathed in a shifting sea of hormones, colliding with a relentless, unpredictable barrage of stimuli from the outside world. You might surprise yourself one day. You might suddenly walk away from a career you have spent a decade building, or end a relationship out of the blue, or burst into tears while driving down a perfectly quiet road. You might look in the rearview mirror and think, I had no idea I was going to do that. I could not have predicted that yesterday. That was pure, unscripted free will. But beneath the surface of that sudden, chaotic act, the gears of cause and effect were silently grinding. The decision to quit was not a spontaneous, uncaused spark. It was the invisible accumulation of 1,000 tiny, unexpressed frustrations over the years, suddenly colliding with a poor night of sleep, a dip in your blood sugar, a fleeting memory of a childhood dream triggered by the smell of the morning air, and the exact, dismissive tone of voice someone used when speaking to you that afternoon. The system simply reached a tipping point. The atmospheric pressure finally dropped. The lightning struck. We must stop confusing the limits of our own perception with the laws of reality. Just because you cannot see the millions of invisible strings pulling on a decision does not mean the strings are not there. A system can be entirely locked into the iron grip of cause and effect, yet remain completely unpredictable to the person living inside it. When we finally embrace the reality that chaos is just order wearing a highly complex mask, a heavy, suffocating burden is lifted from our shoulders. We stop demanding that our lives follow a perfectly neat, controllable, and predictable narrative. We begin to understand that we are navigating a universe of staggering, beautiful complexity, where tiny inputs can lead to massive, life-altering outputs. We learn to be incredibly gentle with ourselves and with others when the chaotic storms of life blow us wildly off our intended course. We realize that while we can never perfectly predict exactly where the leaf will land, we can still find a profound sense of peace in watching the spectacular beauty of the fall. Chapter 5. The Magic of Emergence. Picture a cold, crisp evening in late autumn. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, bleeding a deep, bruised purple across the sky. You are standing in an open field, and as you look up, you see a dark cloud sweeping over the trees. But it is not a cloud. It is a flock of thousands of starlings flying together in what is known as a murmuration. For the next 20 minutes, You are absolutely mesmerized. The flock moves like a single, giant, living ribbon. It expands, stretches into a thin veil, suddenly contracts into a dense black sphere, and then folds back over itself in a breathtaking, fluid wave. When a falcon darts into the formation to attack, the flock instantly splits in half, a perfect hollow ring forming around the predator before seamlessly fusing back together. As you watch this magnificent display, it is impossible not to feel that you are witnessing a single, conscious organism making deliberate choices. It looks as though the flock has an imagination. It appears to possess intent, creativity, and a master plan. You naturally assume that somewhere in that massive cloud of wings there must be a leader giving orders, or at the very least a shared, complex intelligence guiding the dance. But there is no leader. There is no master plan. If you zoom in and look at a single individual bird, you will find something astonishingly simple. The single starling knows absolutely nothing about the giant ribbon or the hollow ring. The individual bird is entirely unconcerned with the artistic shape of the flock. It is only following 3 rigidly simple local rules. Do not bump into the bird immediately next to you, fly in the same general direction as the birds close to you, and move toward the center of the birds around you. That is it. 3 incredibly basic, unthinking instructions. Yet when you multiply those simple rules by tens of thousands of birds, the result is a staggering, unpredictable, and beautiful complexity that looks exactly like conscious, creative freedom. This is the phenomenon of emergence. It is one of the most powerful and wildly misunderstood forces in the natural world. It is the magical process by which a collection of simple, unthinking parts comes together to form a whole that is vastly more sophisticated than the sum of its pieces. We see it everywhere. An individual ant is virtually blind and lacks the brain power to comprehend anything beyond a faint chemical trail, yet a colony of ants can construct perfectly ventilated subterranean cities and engineer complex bridges out of their own bodies. A single molecule of water is not wet. Wetness is a property that only emerges when billions of molecules interact. When we observe emergence, our human minds are desperate to find a ghost in the machine. We are so utterly baffled by how simple, determined rules can create such breathtaking complexity that we try to insert a spark of magic into the gap between the parts and the whole. And nowhere do we do this more fiercely than when we look inside our own heads. Think about your brain. It is the most complex structure in the known universe, consisting of roughly 86 billion individual neurons. A single neuron is just a tiny, wet biological switch. It possesses no feelings, no thoughts, no morality, and absolutely no intent. It simply sits in the dark, waiting for a chemical signal. If enough sodium flows through its membrane, it reaches a threshold and fires an electrical charge. If not, it remains silent. It is a rigid, mechanical, thoroughly deterministic microscopic machine, obeying the strict laws of cellular biology. Yet, when you wire 86 billion of these unthinking switches together, something miraculous happens. From this dark, silent biological machinery emerges the capacity to compose symphonies, to weep over a broken heart, to contemplate the vastness of the cosmos, and to feel a profound, unshakable sense of self. You feel like a conscious I. You feel like a CEO sitting in a control room behind your eyes, calling the shots, weighing the options, and authoring your own destiny. Because the leap from a single blind neuron to a complex dreaming human being is so unimaginably vast, we have spent centuries using emergence as the ultimate escape hatch for free will. We argue that yes, perhaps the individual cells are bound by the strict chains of cause and effect. Perhaps the basic chemistry is predetermined. But we tell ourselves that when you stack enough complexity together, the system transcends its parts. We believe that at some point, the sheer volume of billions of interacting neurons suddenly rewrites the rules of physics, and a completely independent, free-willing conscious mind magically floats to the surface, unburdened by the biology that created it. But this is a fundamental, deeply comforting illusion. Let us return to the physical world to understand why. Imagine you are holding a single heavy clay brick. It is solid, dense, and entirely bound by the law of gravity. If you drop it, it will fall. Now imagine you take 10 million of these exact same bricks and you construct a breathtaking, soaring, majestic cathedral. By bringing the parts together, you have created a magnificent emergent property. You have created awe-inspiring acoustics, beautiful arches, and a space that can move people to tears. The cathedral is vastly more meaningful and complex than the single brick. But does the cathedral suddenly defy gravity? Can the cathedral simply decide to float away into the sky because it is complex? Of course not. The architectural masterpiece remains strictly and entirely governed by the exact same physical rules as the single brick resting in the mud. The whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, but it can never, ever defy the rules of its parts. You are the cathedral. Your consciousness, your personality, your soaring dreams, and your deepest anxieties are beautiful, breathtaking properties that emerge from a staggeringly complex biological system. But complexity does not equal independence. No matter how wildly sophisticated the brain becomes, it cannot pull off the ultimate magic trick of escaping the physical universe. A system built of strictly determined parts cannot miraculously generate a completely free, uncaused outcome, no matter how many moving gears you add to the machine. The flock of starlings may look like a single free-willed entity painting the sky, but every single movement is still the unavoidable result of the birds blindly reacting to their immediate neighbors. When we finally understand that emergence is not a magical portal to free will, we might fear that life loses its wonder. We might worry that viewing ourselves as complex biological cathedrals reduces our humanity to cold, lifeless machinery. But the exact opposite is true. It takes far more imagination and yields a far deeper awe to look at a human being with all our capacity for love, sacrifice, and resilience, and realize that this entire experience is being generated by the humble, rhythmic firing of microscopic cells. You are not a magical ghost haunting a biological shell. You are the universe expressing itself in unimaginable complexity. We do not need to invent a mystical, rule-breaking force to find beauty in our existence. The true magic of emergence is realizing that you are built of nothing but ordinary, determined pieces, and yet, together, they have managed to build a mind capable of understanding itself. Chapter 6. The Quantum Mirage. There is a profound, almost desperate fear that haunts the human mind when we begin to peel back the layers of our own biology. As we trace our actions back through the relentless chains of chemistry, environment, and genetics, a terrifying thought takes root. If every thought and action is just the result of prior causes, then we are nothing more than impossibly complex biological machines. In a desperate search for a loophole, for a secret hidden door out of this deterministic prison, human beings have looked everywhere. When biology failed to give us an answer, we looked to psychology. When psychology failed, we looked to classical physics. And finally, in a last-ditch effort to save the concept of free will, we pointed our microscopes down into the absolute basement of reality, the bizarre, unpredictable world of the subatomic. Imagine trying to catch a firefly in a completely dark room. You see it glow in the corner, so you swing your net. But the moment you look again, it has not just flown to the other side of the room, it is somehow existing in 3 different places at once, only deciding on a single location the exact millisecond you turn on the lights. This logic-defying, deeply confusing scenario is essentially how the universe operates at the quantum level. Down in the realm of electrons and photons, the solid, reliable rules of our everyday world completely break down. Things do not move in predictable, easily trackable paths. They exist in clouds of probability. A particle does not have a strict, determined cause for why it appears in one specific spot rather than another. It essentially rolls a microscopic cosmic die. For decades, philosophers and defenders of free will have peered into this subatomic casino and breathed a massive sigh of relief. They look at the unpredictable nature of quantum mechanics and say, there it is. The universe is not a rigid, perfectly wound clock after all. There is true randomness at the very bottom of reality, and because we are made of the universe, that randomness must be the source of our conscious freedom. But this is a mirage. It is a beautiful, deeply tempting optical illusion that evaporates the moment you try to step inside it. The first massive wall this theory crashes into is the sheer scale of the human brain. The brain is not a pristine, frozen, delicate vacuum where the whisper of a single subatomic particle can dictate the future. The brain is a massive, wet, hot, chaotic biological hurricane, Trillions of molecules are constantly slamming into each other in a deafening roar of chemical activity. Imagine standing on a rocky shoreline during a violent, raging tempest, the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs with earth-shaking force. Now imagine trying to hear the sound of a single grain of sand dropping into the water. That is what it is like for a single quantum event to try and influence the conscious mind. Even if an electron inside one of your neurons behaves completely randomly, that microscopic glitch is instantly swallowed, neutralized, and averaged out by the overwhelming, deterministic momentum of the macro world. But let us push past the physics. Let us indulge the ultimate fantasy of the free will defender. Let us pretend that the chaotic storm of the brain magically parts, allowing a single random quantum event to travel upward, trigger a specific neuron, start a chain reaction, and cause a completely new thought to burst into your conscious mind. Imagine you are sitting at your kitchen table late at night, staring at an envelope full of cash. It belongs to an acquaintance who dropped it earlier that day. Your own business is failing. Your family is quietly struggling to stay afloat. That money could solve months of suffocating anxiety. No one would ever know you took it. You sit there agonizing over the choice. Your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating, and your mind is an exhausting battlefield of ethics, desperation, temptation, and fear. After an agonizing hour, something inside you shifts. You push the envelope away. You pick up your phone to call the rightful owner and return the money. You have conquered your darkest impulse. You have done the profoundly right thing. Now, imagine discovering that your moral victory had absolutely nothing to do with your character, your history, your deep-seated empathy, or the values your parents taught you. Imagine learning that the only reason you pushed the envelope away was because a single subatomic particle inside your frontal cortex happened to randomly zig instead of zag. If that microscopic die had rolled a 3 instead of a 4, you would have stolen the money. Does that feel like freedom? Does that feel like you are the proud author of your own destiny? Randomness is not autonomy. In fact, randomness is the exact opposite of intent. If our deepest moral choices are truly being driven by subatomic dice rolls, then we are not the masters of our fate. We are simply hostages to a cosmic slot machine. You cannot build a meaningful life out of static. You cannot build profound human character, responsibility, or love out of a random glitch. We desperately want to believe in free will because we want to own our choices. We want our decisions to be a reflection of who we are. But to say a choice was caused by who you are is to admit that it was determined by the specific history, biology, and environment that created you. If a choice is completely uncaused, disconnected from your past and your biology, it ceases to belong to you at all. The quantum mirage is the final, ultimate attempt to escape the reality of cause and effect. But when the mirage fades, we are left with a truth that is far more grounding. We do not need the universe to be random to find meaning in our actions. True freedom is not found in the chaotic jumping of an electron. It is found in finally accepting the profound, unbroken chain of events that has led us to exactly where we are, allowing us to face the world not as magical beings standing outside of nature, but as beautifully complex expressions of nature itself. Chapter 7. Facing a World Without Blame. There is a terrifying moment that inevitably arrives for anyone who truly begins to look at the invisible strings pulling at human behavior. Once you have traced your actions back through the dense, tangled roots of biology, environment, and history, the ground beneath your feet can suddenly feel dangerously fragile. It is the moment the illusion shatters. You realize that you are not the ultimate author of your own story, and in that realization, a profound, chilling existential dread takes hold. If every choice you have ever made, every act of love you have ever given, and every sacrifice you have ever endured is simply the inevitable result of a massive, unthinking chain of cause and effect, does any of it mean anything? If we are just breathtakingly complex dominoes falling in a line, why should we care about the future? Why should we strive or build or attempt to be better? This fear is universal. It is the fear of the void, and it is quickly followed by an even darker, more urgent terror, the fear of society completely unraveling. We are taught from birth that the only thing keeping civilization from descending into absolute chaos is the heavy, crushing weight of moral responsibility. We believe that human beings are inherently wild and selfish, and that the only leash holding the monster in check is the concept of blame. We tell ourselves that if people suddenly realized they had no free will, If they truly believed they were not the conscious authors of their darkest impulses, they would simply stop trying. We imagine a nightmare scenario where the floodgates open and people run amok in the streets, stealing, cheating, and hurting one another, all while shrugging their shoulders and saying, "I could not help it. The universe made me do it." We cling to the illusion of free will not just because it flatters our egos, but because we are utterly terrified of what humanity might become without it. We use moral judgment as a weapon to maintain order. We believe that if we drop the weapon, the world will burn. But let us look deeply at the reality of how human beings actually operate. Imagine a city where, overnight, every single law is completely erased. There are no police, no judges, and no threat of punishment. The external threat of blame is entirely removed. What happens? Do you immediately walk into your neighbor's house and take their belongings? Do you suddenly feel the overwhelming urge to inflict pain on a stranger passing you on the street? The answer, for the vast majority of people, is absolutely not. And the reason you do not hurt your neighbor is not because you are terrified of a philosophical concept of free will. You do not stop yourself from causing harm because of an abstract intellectual theory. You refrain from causing harm because the idea of hurting another human being feels biologically and emotionally abhorrent to you. Your empathy is not a fragile intellectual choice. It is a profound, deeply wired biological drive. Over millions of years of evolution, we survived precisely because we learned to feel the pain of our community as if it were our own. The warm, fierce urge to protect your children, the deep satisfaction of helping a friend carry a heavy load, the sickening drop in your stomach when you see someone crying, these are not choices. They are physical reactions. They are part of the inescapable machinery of a healthy human mind. Understanding that our actions are determined does not magically erase the biological reality of love. It does not delete our natural aversion to suffering. The fact that your compassion was built by genetics and childhood environment rather than a mystical spark of free will does not make the compassion any less real. It does not make it any less beautiful. We do not need the threat of moral blame to want to live in a safe, connected, and thriving society. We want those things because we are human. Yet, there is a very real, incredibly difficult personal struggle hidden inside this realization. It is easy to look at the grand scale of society and theorize about determinism. It is agonizingly difficult to apply it to your own life when you have been deeply hurt. Imagine someone betrays your trust in the most devastating way possible. They lie to you, they damage your reputation, and they walk away without a shred of remorse. In that moment, your ancient biological wiring demands retribution. Your blood pressure spikes, stress hormones flood your system, and you feel a searing white-hot desire to hate them. Hate is incredibly seductive. Hate feels powerful. It gives you a sense of control in a moment where you feel completely powerless. To pause in that exact moment of searing anger and to force yourself to remember that the person who hurt you is a victim of their own broken history, their own blind spots, and their own unchosen neurobiology. That takes a staggering, almost impossible amount of effort. It feels completely unnatural. It feels like you are letting them off the hook. It is exhausting to look at the worst behavior of humanity and refuse to take the easy, satisfying road of moral condemnation. It is so much easier to simply point the finger and say, "You are evil." Living without blame is not a passive, lazy philosophy. It is the hardest, most demanding psychological work a human being can undertake. It requires you to constantly, relentlessly swim against the raging current of your own evolutionary instincts. But what do we gain when we endure that difficulty? What is the reward for dropping the heavy, exhausting armor of judgment? We trade the cheap, fleeting satisfaction of vengeance for the profound, lasting power of understanding. When we stop obsessing over moral blame, we do not stop protecting ourselves. If a person is dangerously hurting others, we still physically stop them. We still build strong boundaries. We still remove ourselves from toxic environments. But we strip away the poisonous, corrosive element of hatred. We stop viewing the person as a demonic entity who freely chose to be broken, and we start viewing them as a tragically malfunctioning machine. When you truly face a world without blame, the sky does not fall. Humanity does not run amok. Instead, the world becomes infinitely softer. The crushing weight of your own past mistakes, the regrets that keep you awake at night, the anger you hold toward the people who failed you, it all begins to dissolve. You step into a reality where you can finally look at the deepest, most painful flaws in yourself and others, and instead of asking with disgust, "How could you choose to do this?" you learn to ask with profound, radical grace, "What happened to bring you to this point?" Chapter 8. The Mechanics of Change. There is a dangerous, heavy shadow that often falls over people when they first grasp the reality of a determined universe. It is the shadow of fatalism. If every choice is the unavoidable result of an unbroken chain of prior causes, if our biology and our history have already set the tracks beneath our feet, why should we try to do anything at all? Why should we attempt to learn a new language, mend a fractured relationship, or fight an exhausting battle against addiction? If the machinery is already in motion, sitting in the dark and doing nothing feels like the only logical response. We fall into this trap because we profoundly confuse the word determined with the word unchangeable, but these are two entirely different concepts. To understand how a biological machine with absolutely no free will can still completely transform its own life, we have to look past the philosophical panic and examine the actual physical mechanics of how change happens. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a dense, overgrown forest. You need to get from your starting point to a lake on the other side. The very first time you attempt this journey, it is agonizing. You are pushing through thick, tangled brush. Your clothes are tearing on hidden thorns and you are constantly stumbling over thick roots buried in the mud. It requires massive amounts of energy and focus just to move a few feet. But the next day you take the exact same path. It is still difficult, but perhaps a fraction of a percent easier because some of the branches are already broken. A month later, the path is a visible dirt trail. A year later, the soil is packed down hard. 10 years later, it is a wide paved road, and you can walk it completely blindfolded without a second thought. Your brain operates on the exact same physical principle. We call this process neuroplasticity, but we must strip away the cold, clinical nature of that word to truly understand its power. Your mind is not a hard drive where data is permanently burned onto a static disk. It is a living, breathing ecosystem. Every single time you experience something, the physical structure of your brain changes. Think of a person who has spent 30 years of their life terrified of deep water. Perhaps they had a near-drowning experience as a very small child. For decades, the mere smell of chlorine or the sound of crashing waves triggers a violent, automatic biological response. Their heart rate skyrockets, their chest tightens, and a rush of adrenaline floods their system. They cannot simply use free will to choose not to be afraid. The fear is a deeply paved 10-lane highway in their brain wired for immediate survival. So, how does this person ever learn to swim? They do not do it by sitting in a chair and summoning a magical spark of courage out of thin air. They change through the slow, mechanical introduction of new, deterministic inputs. Suppose they finally decide they want to overcome this fear so they can take their children to the beach. They start by simply sitting on the edge of a shallow, perfectly calm pool, only letting their toes touch the water. The old paved road of fear immediately begins to fire. Danger! We are going to die! But at the exact same moment, their sensory organs are taking in new information. The water is only inches deep. We are breathing fine. We are surrounded by safety. In that moment, a profound biological collision occurs. The brain is experiencing a contradiction. And because the new sensory input is sustained and undeniably safe, the brain begins to adapt. It lays down a fragile, microscopic new connection, a tiny alternate route around the highway of fear. It is the very first set of footprints in the thick brush. The next day they wade in up to their knees. The new pathway grows a tiny bit stronger. Weeks later they are submerged to their waist, guided by the calming, rhythmic voice of an instructor. This person is not defying the laws of cause and effect. They are weaponizing them. Change does not happen because a ghost in the machine suddenly decided to be brave. Change happens because new environmental inputs force the biological machinery to literally, physically rewire itself. The person who eventually swims effortlessly in the ocean is fundamentally, structurally different from the person who panicked at the edge of the pool. Their brain has grown new roads and allowed the old highways of panic to become overgrown with weeds. This mechanical reality completely revolutionizes how we must approach our own personal growth. If you want to change a deeply ingrained habit, build a business, or become a more patient and present parent, you do not sit in an empty room and try to manufacture grit from the depths of your soul. That is a guaranteed recipe for shame and exhaustion. Instead, you must become a deliberate architect of your environment. You change your life by carefully, ruthlessly curating the forces that act upon you. You change the information you consume, you alter the people you surround yourself with, and you manipulate the microscopic habits of your daily routine. You do this knowing that every single one of these choices acts as a physical chisel, slowly chipping away at your neural pathways. You do not try to outwill your biology, you gently, persistently reprogram it. You are not a helpless passenger on a runaway train, locked into a tragic destiny by the events of your past, nor are you a magical being floating above the laws of physics. You are something far more beautiful and grounded. You are a masterpiece of adaptation. You are a living, breathing system that is designed to be shaped by the world. When you finally stop fighting the reality of determinism and learn how the gears of your own mind actually turn, the shadow of fatalism vanishes. You realize that the power to change was never found in defying nature. It is found in understanding it. Chapter 9. The Evolution of Justice. Imagine a small, tightly knit village a few hundred years ago. It is a quiet afternoon, the sun is high, and suddenly, a young person collapses in the town square. Their body goes rigid, their eyes roll back, and they begin to violently convulse in the dirt. The villagers immediately stop what they are doing and form a terrified circle. In their minds, they are not witnessing a medical emergency. They are witnessing a profound moral failing. They believe the child has allowed a dark spirit to enter their soul, or that the family is being punished by the heavens for a hidden sin. The villagers do not offer comfort, they offer condemnation. They might banish the family, or tragically, they might torture the child in an attempt to drive the darkness out. Today, we look back at those villagers with a heavy mixture of pity and horror. We possess the scientific vocabulary to understand exactly what happened in that square. We know it was a neurological event, epilepsy. We know that a cluster of neurons in the brain temporarily misfired, creating an electrical storm that the child had absolutely no control over. Because we understand the biology of the event, the concept of moral blame entirely evaporates. We do not punish a person for having a seizure. We offer them a soft place to rest their head, and we search for the right medication to calm the electrical storm. We look at this historical shift, and we feel incredibly proud of ourselves. We believe we have finally drawn a bold, permanent line between biological luck and moral character. But we are deceiving ourselves. We have not eliminated the village square. We have merely redesigned it. Today, when a human being commits a terrible act, when they shatter the social contract, steal, or act with devastating violence, our modern society reacts with the exact same unthinking, righteous fury as those ancient villagers. Because we cannot easily see the invisible electrical storms of severe childhood trauma, the crippling, brain-altering effects of deep poverty, or the subtle inherited genetic vulnerabilities that compromise the frontal cortex, we assume those things do not matter. We look at the broken behavior and we declare with absolute certainty they chose to be evil. And because we believe they chose it, we feel entirely justified in locking them in concrete cages and intentionally inflicting suffering upon them. To understand how fundamentally illogical this is, let us remove human emotion from the equation for a moment and look at a machine we actually understand. Imagine you are driving a newly released, highly anticipated hybrid SUV. You know this vehicle inside and out. You understand the intricate, seamless way it balances its combustion engine with its electric motor to achieve maximum efficiency. You are driving this complex, beautiful machine down a steep, winding mountain road. Suddenly, a microscopic sensor within the regenerative braking system fails. The system short-circuits, the brakes lock up, and the heavy vehicle swerves out of your control, crashing into a storefront and causing devastating damage. When the authorities arrive, how do they respond? Do they drag the SUV into a public square and beat the hood with sledgehammers to teach the vehicle a moral lesson? Do they lock the car in a dark, damp garage for 20 years, hoping the car will sit in the dark, think about what it did, and miraculously fix its own broken sensor? No. That would be the definition of madness. We immediately recognize that the SUV is a complex system that suffered a critical mechanical failure. We take the car off the road so it cannot hurt anyone else. We bring in mechanics to dismantle the system, find the broken wire, and attempt to repair it. If the underlying system is fundamentally shattered and cannot be fixed, the vehicle is permanently removed from the road, but at no point do we ever demand that the car suffer for the sake of suffering. Yet, when a human being, an organism infinitely more unpredictable, sensitive, and complex than any vehicle ever engineered, experiences a catastrophic failure of their emotional braking system, we throw all logic out the window. We do not just want them removed from the road, we desperately want them to hurt. Why is it so difficult to let go of retributive punishment? The uncomfortable truth is that punishing others feels intoxicatingly good. We are biologically wired to enjoy it. Think about the warm, triumphant surge of satisfaction you feel when someone cuts you off in dangerous traffic, and 2 miles down the road, you see them pulled over by the police. Think of the deep, visceral joy of watching a cruel villain meet a horrific end in a movie. When we see someone who has broken the rules receive their just desserts, our brains are flooded with dopamine. It is a powerful, evolutionary reward system designed to encourage us to police the boundaries of our tribe. But just because an impulse is natural does not make it just. We have built our entire modern justice system not around fixing broken machinery, but around satisfying our own biological addiction to vengeance. We disguise our thirst for retribution under the noble word justice. If we finally accept that no one chooses their own biology, their parents, their environment, or the invisible traumas that shape their neurochemistry, then the entire foundation of retributive punishment collapses. It becomes nothing more than socially sanctioned cruelty. It becomes the act of punishing someone for the devastating bad luck of their own existence. This realization terrifies people. They immediately assume that without punishment, the prison doors must swing open, allowing dangerous people to roam the streets unchecked. But a world without blame is not a world without protection. We have an absolute, unyielding moral obligation to protect society from those who cause harm. We just have to change the mechanism from retribution to quarantine. When a person contracts a highly contagious, deadly virus, we do not hesitate to quarantine them in a hospital. We physically remove them from society to protect the public. But we do not make their hospital bed deliberately uncomfortable. We do not feed them rotting food. We do not scream at them for being unlucky enough to catch the virus. We treat them with profound dignity. We apply the best medical interventions we possess to try and cure them, and the moment they are no longer a threat, we welcome them back into the community. If their condition is incurable, they may remain safely quarantined for life, but they never lose their humanity in our eyes. The evolution of justice demands that we treat the violent, the broken, and the dangerous with the exact same philosophy. We must protect the innocent, absolutely. But we must stop taking joy in the suffering of the guilty. We must recognize that the line separating the upstanding citizen from the condemned prisoner is almost entirely drawn by the invisible, unearned luck of biology and circumstance. One day, our descendants will look back at our concrete cells and our deep love of punishment with the exact same heartbreak we feel for the villagers who punished the convulsing child. They will wonder how it took us so long to finally see the humanity hidden beneath the broken machinery. Chapter 10. The Empathy Imperative. Think of a grand, glowing room filled with applause. Imagine a person standing at a podium holding a heavy glass award. They look out at a crowd of admirers, raise the microphone, and tell the story of their success. They speak of the late nights, the agonizing sacrifices, and the seemingly insurmountable obstacles they conquered. They smile with deep satisfaction and say the words our culture worships above all others. I built this with my own 2 hands. I started with nothing, but I outworked everyone. I earned this. Now, leave that glowing room and travel to a very different scene. Imagine a small, dimly lit apartment at 3 a.m. A person sits alone at a kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of past due bills. They are utterly exhausted, worn down by a life of relentless, grinding struggle. They replay their mistakes, their missed opportunities, and the times they gave up when things became too hard. They drop their head into their hands, crushed by a suffocating weight, and they whisper to the empty room, "I am exactly where I deserve to be. I brought this on myself. I am a failure." Both of these people are completely captured by the exact same devastating illusion. It is the illusion of the self-made soul. It is the belief that at the very core of our existence there is a completely independent, free-willing agent who is ultimately responsible for our triumphs and our tragedies. When we finally pull back the curtain on the machinery of human life, when we trace the unbroken chain of biology, environment, genetics, and sheer undeniable luck, this illusion shatters. And the collapse of this illusion demands a total and radical rethinking of how we view ourselves and every single person we share this planet with. To accept a world without free will is to fundamentally destroy the myth of meritocracy. The person standing at the podium, basking in the applause, did not conjure their success out of thin air. They were the beneficiary of an astronomical lottery they did not buy a ticket for. Perhaps they were born with a frontal cortex perfectly calibrated for sustained focus and impulse control. Perhaps they grew up in an environment where failure was treated as a learning experience rather than an existential threat, wiring their brain for resilience. Perhaps they had access to childhood nutrition that allowed their cognitive faculties to fully bloom, or they simply possessed the specific talents that their specific culture happened to reward at that specific moment in history. Even their grit, their legendary work ethic, and their ability to endure pain were the unavoidable results of a biological system functioning exactly as it was shaped to function. They are a masterpiece of good fortune. To look at that towering mountain of luck and claim, "I did this all by myself," is to deny the reality of the universe. But if success is stripped of its blinding arrogance, then failure is stripped of its crushing shame. The person sitting in the dark at the kitchen table is not a fundamentally broken soul who chose to be defeated. They are the tragic collision of 1,000 invisible disadvantages. They are carrying the heavy, generational weight of an overactive amygdala tuned for anxiety, or the physical brain drain of chronic childhood stress, or the simple, devastating bad luck of being born into a zip code where survival required prioritizing immediate safety over long-term planning. When you truly internalize this, a profound shift occurs in your chest. The armor of judgment you have worn your entire life simply falls to the floor. It is easy to assume that letting go of free will would make us cold and uncaring, that seeing ourselves as biological machines would drain the warmth from the world. But the exact opposite happens. When you realize that not a single human being chose the biological machinery they were handed, you are left with only one logical response to the world around you: an overwhelming, radical empathy. This is the empathy imperative. It is not the soft, fragile empathy of pity. It is a fierce, unyielding grace born from an uncompromising understanding of reality. When you see someone lashing out in anger, you no longer see a demon. You see a nervous system screaming in panic, locked in a survival loop it cannot escape. When you encounter someone trapped in addiction, you do not see a failure of morals. You see a tragic hijacking of the brain's dopamine system desperately trying to soothe an unbearable internal pain. And when you look in the mirror at your own deepest regrets, you stop tearing yourself apart. You realize that in your darkest moments you were operating with the exact tools you had available in that specific millisecond, under the exact pressures of your environment. You could not have done otherwise. Living with this perspective does not mean we stop striving for a better world. We still build magnificent things. We still celebrate art, innovation, and courage. We still hold people accountable when they cause harm, and we still work tirelessly to change the environments that break people down. But we do it all without the poison of entitlement and the cruelty of blame. We stop expecting people to magically pull themselves up by bootstraps they were never given. Instead, we begin the hard, beautiful work of building a society that actually supports the machinery of human flourishing. We focus on healing rather than punishing. We focus on giving people the environmental inputs they need to biologically thrive. We are all traveling on a vast, unpredictable river. None of us chose the boat we were given. None of us chose the strength of the current, the hidden rocks beneath the surface, or the sudden, terrifying storms that roll in from the horizon. Some of us were placed in sturdy, reinforced vessels, easily gliding past the rapids. Some of us were handed leaky rafts and asked to navigate a hurricane. Understanding the science of life without free will is not a surrender to the dark. It is the ultimate call to connection. It is the realization that since we are all caught in the exact same current, driven by the exact same unyielding laws of nature, the very least we can do is reach across the water and help each other stay afloat. It is the breathtaking permission to finally forgive the world for being exactly what it is, and to forgive ourselves for being exactly who we are.